Hi, everyone. This is the Perspective with Viv podcast. My name is Viv, and welcome to the show. Today's title is The Inner Critic Lies with Albert Bramante. Dr. Albert Bramante is a seasoned talent agent with more than 2 decades of experience in the entertainment industry. He holds a PhD in psychology from Walden University. Additionally, he's a certified hypnotist and NLP practitioner, bringing a unique blend of psychological insights and practical expertise to his work. Driven by a passion for both the performing arts and the human psyche, he embarked on a mission to empower actors to overcome self-sabotage and unlock their full potential. Throughout his impressive career, Dr. Bramante has achieved remarkable success as a talent agent, securing roles for actors in a wide array of productions, including TV shows, films, commercials, Broadway, and off-Broadway performances. Hi, Albert. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Viv, for having me. I'm really happy to be here. I'm really was looking forward to being on this podcast. So
Me too. I have to say something before we start. I love Broadway. I
nice.
love I love Broadway shows. I love off-Broadway shows. I just love theater in general. So I'm really looking forward to talking more about art and everything that you've done.
Excellent. What's your favorite show, by the way? Do you have a
What's my
favorite?
favorite show that I've watched on Broadway?
Yes,
Memphis, for some reason, comes to mind. And If Then comes to mind as well. With Dina
absolutely.
Menzel. Oh my God, that was a good
Oh,
one.
Idina, yeah, she's excellent.
Yes. Okay. So,
Ah,
Albert, your life reads like a sacred braid: psychology, performance, spirit, and science. When did you realize these threads weren't separate but part of the same weave?
it's interesting because growing up, I was always a very spiritual person, and I consider myself. I don't like to use the word black sheep of the family with the white sheep of the family. So I was different. Yeah, I was the youngest of five, three brothers, one sister. I'm the youngest, and everyone in my family were natural born athletes. Football, baseball, coaching. My father, my oldest brother, and my father were coaches, and they tried to get me into it. Naturally, which I can understand. Throw a ball, put a baseball glove in my hand or put a football in my hand, and I had zero interest in it. Plus, I had no ability. But I also had zero interest in it. I loved to read, and so the library was like my sanctuary growing up. And I realized I wanted to kind of manage because even at a young age, I don't remember the story is being told to me. My father was trying to get me to play ball, and I turned to him. I said, "Dad, I don't want to play for the team. I want to own the team." And that got me into, I think the whole passion for maybe managing. Reading, I was always a curious type of person. I was a thinker, so I love science. So I read a lot of books about the brain when I was in high school, and that turned me into psychology. And then in high school, I was part of the drama club. And then in my when I was going for my bachelor's degree, I took some electives in acting and theater. And I love that too. Fast forward after I received my master's degree, I was working in New York City, and I started encountering actors again, and it kind of bit me a little bit. So I did a little stint as an actor myself, and I realized I didn't necessarily like acting, but I love being around actors. I love being on set. I love being, just around creative people in general. These are like my people. These are my tribe, my tribe, so to speak. So I then kind of shifted and decided, well, let me find a way that I can support actors, whether it's providing, emotional support. And then I said, I'm going to try to find them work. And so that's in 2004, I started my first company. During that time, I was also going for my PhD in psychology. I decided to, when you have to do a PhD, do a dissertation, which is a long-winded, extensive research project. And so I decided to do mine on actors and self-sabotage, which started my book. And so that's how those worlds connected: actor, psychologist, and researcher. Now, spirituality, I was always a person that liked, talking about deep topics. I a little deep sometimes made my family very uncomfortable, but I still was like a direction I've always wanted to go into. So, and that's sort of like how that spirituality came in. And I've gone to a lot of mystics and psychics in the past, and all of them mostly have told me that I'm very spiritual and very psychic myself. So I've always had like a strong intuition about things.
Thank you for sharing that with me. Now let's talk about the title you proposed, The Inner Critic is a Liar. What's the biggest lie it tells us, and who taught it to lie so well?
Well, the lie is that we're inadequate, or the lie is that we're not worthy enough. And what taught us is sometimes our parents or early teachers. And I don't want to demonize or put parents down or anything, because I know that a lot of times they're doing the best with what they can, with what they have. But their intention sometimes is set the child up for fear or some sort of feeling inadequate. And especially going back as a child, if you have to compete for your parents' love and affection, then you start to internalize as a child that maybe I'm not adequate enough. And then that, lingers with you throughout adulthood, and that takes your inner critic. And your inner critic, is not always honest. Now your inner critic I feel is always there to protect you, even though it may be misguided protection, it's still there to protect you.
And you say the inner critic is often the last defense of the wounded inner child. How can we learn to respond to it with care without letting it drive the show?
Well, the inner child, very often, again, there's, obviously sometimes we can experience childhood trauma that's very significant, but even minor instances, parents being, yelling at us or punishing us, these little minor trauma, micro traumas in a sense, can eventually add up to become significant trauma responses. Well, the very first thing is to have compassion and insight, and just awareness is a key of how these things are operating, rather than going on automatic pilot in a sense. So that what would be the first, step is insight, and just having that insight alone that, okay, the inner child is needs love and protection, your inner child. And very often we try to run away, or we try to escape the inner child. And it's a part of us, and we can't really escape it because it's a part of who we are. And we need to nurture that. And so there's a lot of work that sometimes we do in like hypnosis and NLP, which is healing the inner child, loving that inner child, and nurturing that inner child, because that is what's really going to help us heal and become. And a lot of times that the inner critic, going back to what we talked about just briefly, the inner critic can sometimes be that inner child. They're obviously could be synonymous with each other.
I totally agree. And one thing I do agree with the most is that, yes, different things or trauma points can add up to something big. Like if you've been subjected to verbal abuse or mistreatment as a child, it could be narrative you run in your head where you tell yourself that I'm meant to withstand and tolerate this kind of treatment. So that's what forms you as a person. But obviously, it's our jobs to dive deep and start to heal those aspects and see where it came from and then transmute it. That leads me to my next question. What's a shadow aspect you've personally had to integrate in order to expand creatively or spiritually?
The biggest thing to integrate is that we have these, things that happen to us. And rather than looking at it as something negatively, we can use it positively. And you mentioned something briefly which really resonates with that shadow work. Sometimes really confronting and integrating the shadow. A lot of people run away from the shadow. Again, that's a part of us. So why not become friends with the shadow and actually use it for sorts of, creativity, for growth. So the one thing is just to integrate it is by, appreciating the fact that, look, we have our flaws, we have our negativities. And I think one of the biggest lies, going with verbal abuse and misconceptions growing up, is we're kind of taught as children that words will never hurt us. There's a classic saying that sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. And can't I think that is the most inaccurate statement, because names can hurt more so than sometimes the sticks and stones can. So they can last us have such a long lingering effect on us.
I totally agree. Totally agree. And for me as a person, I thoroughly believe that it can be as impactful as being hit with sticks and stones. It's like literally the same thing. One is just physical and the other one is emotional. And a lot of times people don't know that when somebody is subjected to emotional abuse, you can't see the scars, you can't see the wounds. So they don't see it or measure it up to something as something like physical abuse where you can see the wounds and bruises. That's what I've noticed in general. Do you agree?
Yeah, and that's what makes it sometimes very hard to change in a sense, and that makes it really hard to look at. Because a physical wound, you can put a band-aid, you can clean it out, and it'll heal. Those cells will regenerate and it'll heal right away. Because emotional wounds are invisible, they're harder to heal and they're more difficult to heal. It takes a lot of time. And now we can have someone in traditional therapy connect to their inner child, and that inner child can do a lot of the healing in itself.
Yes. So, for the artist who's blocked, how do they begin the process of meeting the shadow without being swallowed by it?
Well, the one thing is when you kind of come from a point of embracing a shadow, you won't be swallowed by it. Being swallowed by it again is running away from it because eventually it's because hey, I'm catching up to you,
So
and
true.
now because I haven't been fed or dealt with, I'm gonna be a omnipotent thing. I'm gonna be manifest itself in your nightmares, and I'm gonna manifest yourself in your, you know, your anxiety. I'm gonna now create anxiety with you. So it's about being friends with your shadow and being friends with the dark side of you. And that's just you could just by being mindful, keep a journal of all your thoughts that kind of cup in your head. And then sit with them. Don't you know, I'm all about like wellness and all that, but I think there's also a side of like what we call toxic positivity where it's like the whole don't worry, be happy mentality all the time, which is not realistic all the time. So I think sometimes being sitting with our emotions, even if they're not exactly positive at the moment, but admitting to it and working through it is important. So I think the first thing is to take stock of the thoughts, the emotions, everything that kind of runs through your head, and keep that as an active journal in a sense. And when you can start to work through that, that's when you can start to heal a bit. Then you can take the shadow and say, okay, you're part of me, I'm a part of you. I love you, shadow. In a sense, you love me. Let's work together now. And then you will also incorporate the inner child. And you could also argue that the inner child, your shadow, could just be your inner child who's angry because they're ignored.
Or your
So
inner teenager.
yeah, and they're teenager. Exactly. They have angst. They have thing. They need love,
Mm-hmm.
acceptance. Because even if you look at typical profile of a teenager, yeah, they're gonna. They may come across like I don't need anybody, and yet it's the ones that really say that are the ones who need love the most. And
Yes.
because they're only doing it out of protection, they're saying it out of protection, or they're responding out of anger, just for the protective mechanism of that.
I totally agree. Thank you for sharing that, especially where you said about being friends with your shadow, knowing that your shadow is part of you, being like you love your shadow. It's a very important aspect of self development. It's self alchemy, it's transformation, it's transmutation. And
Hmm.
I think that that's something that it's a principal message that we try to talk about on this podcast. I'm glad that you brought it up and addressed it so directly.
Yeah. I like the process of alchemy. I mean, one of the certifications I studied years ago was alchemical hypnotherapy, which is about, based on a principle of alchemy, which is like that's what alchemy is, turning into gold. So turning our inner, I don't want to say the word crap, but that's what it is, turning our inner crap into gold. So taking our most traumatic experiences or the down points of our life and really making it our strength. And this kind of goes where even our mess can be our message.
So true. Yes, love
Yeah.
that. I didn't know there was something called alchemic. What did you say? Alchemical hypnotherapy.
Yeah, alchemical hypnotherapy, and it's based on like work of like
Wow.
Carl Jung. You know,
Oh, I love Carl Jung.
I so do I. It's one of my favorite personality theorists. So, and it's all about like transforming the all the things that are part of us into gold. And it's one of those I would consider. It's very important, but some might say it's a little esoteric. But I still think it's important. Important part of work. Part of what we do in alchemical hypnotherapy is really embracing again the shadows or nightmare figures. We look at like nightmares, and even Carl Jung kind of really works about the dreams, the symbols and dreams as really important pieces of information. So the nightmares are really good, important messages that we need, that our subconscious saying, hey, you need to pay attention to. So it's giving a strong imagery to do that. So one of the things that we do a process in that is working with dreams, working with nightmares, and having conversations even with the villains in our dreams. So it's a very powerful form of work in a work because again, those nightmares, those villains in our dreams are really there disguised to protect, or they're really there to protect us. And so it's like rather than running away from them. It's like, let's go and meet them. Let's talk to them.
I totally agree. Oh my goodness. I love what we're talking about. I could go on, but I have to go back to our questions. Maybe we'll come back to these themes
Sure.
later on. Yeah. Okay. So in Rise Above the Script, you frame self sabotage as rooted in sacred stories we're afraid to write. What are some of these stories and why are they so hard to face?
Well, the hardest thing to face is a fear. Fear is very hard to face most of the time, and and it's just because fear, if you think about it, gives us a strong emotional and physiological and bodily reaction because it's there to protect us. It's there of us to avoid harm. So I say sometimes we have a big fear. Sometimes we're going into the depths of our being, the depths of our soul, in a sense, and to really confront the fears is what's needed. So one of the things that is really important to overcome to face our fears is overcome our fears is to face it. So that can sometimes be a tough thing to do. But in order to rewrite the story, we're gonna have to and look at what's written already. Because if you think about it, if you're gonna ever, if you're gonna edit a document, for instance, or rewrite an actual story, you have to read the story first, and therefore, to change the text and to change the narrative. So in order to change the narrative of our own stories, we have to kind of go in deep and find that, and that can be very scary. But it's important, and that can come through again through either through your own personal work or getting a trusted therapist to help you with that or a coach to kind of help you with that process.
Yes, I understand what you mean. So, is there a difference between procrastination and spiritual resistance, or are they sometimes the same mask?
I would say they're the same mask, just two sides of a different, two different sides of the same coin in a sense. Because I've often come across, with procrastination being the symptom, not a, because there's so many programs and so many books and so many courses like overcome procrastination, but it's only throwing a band-aid at the problem. Okay, great. But there's a reason why we procrastinate. And especially for those that for those people who identify as, serial or heavy procrastinators, that tells me that you might need to do some inner work on yourself. And very often it's resistance. It's due to resistance, and I feel because of trauma, unresolved trauma, childhood trauma, personal trauma that needs to be dealt with and worked through. And only then, when you work through it, can we start to improve the procrastination aspect of it. Even perfectionism is the same thing. I kind of feel like procrastination, perfection are two different things. Because when you're a heavily perfectionist, you don't do anything at all sometimes, and that's why you see people that are, I say, perfectionist procrastinators will never get anything done because they're so held back.
Wow, so profound. Because I was just about to say that I consider myself a perfectionist when it comes to my art. I paint, but because
Hmm.
I'm not at that level that I want to be yet, or at least that was my mindset back, like before I had this epiphany. Because I thought that I don't have that level yet, what I would see in my mind, I'm not going to be able to create it. So I just pause on the whole thing. And I had an interview with a painter and we spoke about how you have to trust your hands. You have to just allow yourself to release and surrender, to engage in that practice. It's not about creating something beautiful or creating something in line with the standards you've held. It's just about doing it, doing the
Hmm.
work. So, oh my goodness, like it's a thing that holds me back, especially when it comes to art, because I'm very explorative when it comes to art mediums. But if I'm not very good at it, I pause in between projects and there's long pauses. And I don't like long pauses when it comes to art and creations. So yes, you really hit the nail on the head with that one for me.
Yeah, and I can identify and really, agree with what that painter had said, and it's just do it. Even writing a book, for me, it was the same thing. It took me a long time to write the first page because I kept deleting it and kept, putting in a trash bin in my computer. And one of the author masterminds I belong to had suggested, kind of similar to the painter, had suggested write and don't even edit your writing until you're done. Just write. Go from linear and just go straight forward. And then when you're done, go back to edit. And that made a world of a difference for me because when I set to write my book, in 2023, it was June. I remember it was like the beginning of June. I said to myself, I'm going to spend 2 hours a day, and I blocked it out to write my book. And that's what I did. I spent 2 hours a day writing and just writing because it was most of my doctoral dissertation. So a lot of the stuff I already had pre-written to some degree. So it was just now just organizing everything and just expanding. And after 2.5 months, I finally had a manuscript. And otherwise, I would have been probably still to this day on page one. And so my perfectionism was holding me back and was causing me to procrastinate. So it's important to kind of address this but to really look at the underlying issue, not just the symptom.
Yes, I totally agree. That's a food for thought. And one more thing that also inspires me what you shared, because I'm trying to write a book and I can tell you that that's the reason why the book hasn't been published. For the past 2 years at particular deadline, I'm like, the book must be out by this time. We've passed 2 years and we've still not had that book. But I said to myself, I said, this is the year. I don't even care. This is the year where at that particular timeline, that book is going to be out. So you saying this, plus other things that I've heard to influence me, I'm ready for this chapter to begin.
Yeah, and hold
Thank you.
yourself to another thing to do when it comes to procrastination is I'm not a fan of to-do list because, like, if you make a list of this is what I need to be done, it
Okay.
won't. So put it on a calendar. So, okay, by this date, I'm gonna have the first chapter done. By this date, I'm gonna have this amount of pages, and whatever it is, the format you're going to do and what works with you. And even if you don't quite by that date have the exact amount, but if you when you put it on the calendar, it becomes real.
Yes,
So.
thank you. So let's talk about hypnosis. How do hypnosis and ritual differ in how they access the subconscious? And do you combine them?
Yeah, I mean, rituals can mean, different things to anybody else. What I, look at hypnosis is it is a ritual, in a sense. It's not different. It is a ritual. And it depends how you look at it. Like, some people can argue that meditation and hypnosis are the same thing. They are on some level and they're different. So it's like if even if you just reflect and be mindful, listen to your thoughts. That's what really hypnosis is. A lot of people have misconceptions about hypnosis. Some people feel it's mind control, um, or the work of dark forces. And what I say, it's not. It's none of that. We go into hypnosis several times a day, whether we know it or not. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who says, "I'm so scared of hypnosis," and I turned around and I said to her, I said, "Okay, what are you scared about?" Well, I'm just scared about the process. I said, now she's also a devout Christian, so asked her, I said, "Do you pray all the time? Walk me through your prayer." She's like, "Well, I shut my eyes and I just talk to God." And I went, "Okay, so you go into trance and you talk to God." I was like, "Yeah." And I kind of explained to her, I said, "You're scared of something that you've already been through hundreds of times already." And it can look like if you ever get lost in a film or a book, and you just get into trance, or if you listen to a piece of music and it brings you back to a memory or an image in your mind. That's what a hypnosis trance is. If you ever, for those of you who drive, if you ever, you know, start driving to a destination and then forget where did the time go? Like, let's say it's a 2-hour drive and it just seems like 15 minutes and you're there. How did you get there? Because you went into trance and your brain took over as automatic pilot. We go into hypnosis already, and it can be used as a powerful healing modality too, depending on the purpose of it. And it's just using your what you already have, your mind, the power of your mind and power of suggestion. When everybody says, "Well, I can't be hypnotized," I'm like, "Well, that means you can't learn." If you're telling me that, because everybody's suggestible. That's how we learn, and that's all hypnosis is.
I like that I said that you're using what you already have, which is your mind. It clears a lot of misconceptions that people may have about hypnotism as a craft, because it is a craft and it's also an art. And a lot of times people are afraid of what the mind can do. That's why I'm happy that we're talking about this and that we're going to talk about NLP later.
Yeah.
You use hypnosis as a tool for artists to unlock stuck energy. For those unfamiliar, what's actually happening in the subconscious during hypnosis, and how does that help shift creative blocks?
Well, what's happening in the subconscious is we're kind of just communicating with the subconscious in a sense and helping you communicate with the subconscious mind. If you think about it, I'm just a facilitator. The person's doing the work. So, as a facilitator, my role is just to help you connect to your subconscious. And you're doing that yourself. And your subconscious mind, in my view, and the way it's been kind of taught in my training, is it's there to protect us. It's there to protect you at all costs. So now we're just kind of communicating with it like Let's protect you in a different way, in a sense, or maybe, in a different methodology. So for actors, it's all about sometimes working with fears and even transforming fears into different, avenues. For example, there's no, reframing fear is there's no such thing as failure, only feedback. And even looking at fear and kind of like reducing it to the basic elements, fear is really false evidence appearing real. I mean, if you look at the acronym of fear, it's false evidence appearing real, FEAR. And very often, our fears, we come up with images, we come up with scenarios that are much worse than what can actually happen, and they appear real to us. So we kind of look at that as, what's the worst thing that can happen? Well, I'm going to fail. Well, no, you're going to learn. And there's no such thing as failure, only feedback. And if you look at the innovators and leaders over time, how many times did they fall down? And I use the story of infants. If anybody's cared for infants or toddlers, raised children, how many times do they start to walk? When they start to walk, they fall down. How many times they fall down? Hundreds of times. There's never been a recorded infant who said, I'm stopping walking, I quit. They failed so many times, but eventually what happened? They got up and they get a walker. The same thing goes when we do stuff. I think we have to have that mindset and tenacity of that infant. So
Yeah.
it's a natural process, and it's all about connecting to our mind. See, I always feel that we have the answers within us, everything that we need. It's good to have coaches and therapists, but at the same time, the goal should be for us to become our own coach and therapist eventually, to the point where we're not going to need to have them look at them as a crutch or a reliance on other people.
Thank you for that. Now, NLP. It gets a reputation for being either magical or manipulative. Can you briefly tell us how language patterns actually empower artists to reframe their inner dialogue and reclaim agency in their narratives?
Sure. And yeah, you're right. And it really depends upon how you use these tools. I mean, there are a lot of people who can use NLP for good and for transformation. There are some people who have nefarious intentions, which is a reality of any profession, really, if you think about it. But language, NLP, neurolinguistic programming, works with language as well as working with using the power of the mind to eventually reprogram our subconscious mind. Some language patterns, again, could be the words that we use. One thing, a hack that you can use, a mindset hack or a language hack you can use, is use the word yet. So when you say, like somebody says, I haven't, haven't written a book. I didn't write a book, but say yet. I haven't written a book yet. Or I haven't gotten to this yet. Because when you say the word yet and you use that three-letter word, very simple three-letter word, you're transferring the whole meaning of that sentence. And now it's hitting your mind in a different way. When you hear people say, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a doctor yet, or I'm not a thing yet. So that's one thing. Another hack, which is good to use programming, is instead of saying word, I have to do this, or I have to do that, say I get to do this. So like, let's say, like a lot of people will say, I can't go to that in the morning. I have to go to work tomorrow. No, you get to go to work. Or I have to go to the gym. No, you get to go to the gym. Because when you change half from have to get, it's now much more empowering and it becomes softening, softens the language. So another technique that we use with with programming is visualization. So every time you're about to do something, whether you're an actor or you're a speaker or making a sale, always visualize the process going very, very well in your mind, because the brain does not know the difference between reality and fiction. So if you already picture this and you do this so many times of visualizing yourself being a success and whatever it is you're planning to do, you will then have a better outcome, because you're then priming your brain for that to happen. So your brain is already thinking, when you do that, your brain is getting the message, I'm already successful. I've already achieved it.
That is
And
so
so
impressive.
it's act as if it's happening.
I love that. No, these are things I'm very aware of, but hearing you say them is reiterating. This is like visualization. The brain doesn't know the difference between what you visualize and what's there. And that's the truth. I do tarot readings, and one of the cards I picked for this new moon that passed yesterday was don't be connected to what you see with your physical eyes. It's just an illusion. You can
Mhm.
flip it in your mind. That's because if we give that connection or attachment to what we're seeing with our eyes, then we're giving our power away. But if we
Mhm.
hold it in, or if we define what we're seeing, which is why they say there's no meaning, everything is neutral. If we define what we're seeing, if we create the narrative of what we want to see, we can change things. That's what I love about what you've said, and so much more actually.
Yeah.
Okay, my next question. As a hypnotist and psychologist, can you briefly tell us what you notice changes in an artist's self concept after a few deep subconscious sessions? Is there a shift in posture, process, or performance?
I would say all three because posture is very important. So if you when you start to adopt your posture, you change your neurology. And sometimes that can be simple. The first thing to start is changing your posture. So one thing that we sometimes do in the trainings is that right before the day begins, adopting a power posture, standing tall, our hips out, like really embracing our power and standing, and doing the power pose. And there's a lot of things on YouTube that you can find for power poses. But even standing there for 2 minutes, just holding a power pose, can change the physiology, change some of the rewiring, and that will start to change the way you approach your day, and that'll start to also change the way you perform. So sometimes even before an audition, go step into a bath. If it's an in-person audition, go to the restroom where nobody will see you and take a power pose. Like stand up tall, erect, shoulders back, stomach in. And this is, I remember our gym teacher in elementary school had us always walking in this position all the time. Head up tall, shoulders back, stomach in, because that's a power pose. And when you do that, you're setting success up for the day. And, it may not be the first time you do it, but start watching. If you do this consistently for 30 days, I guarantee you're going to start to see some small changes. And eventually, small changes lead to more small changes. Eventually, to snowball.
Oh my goodness. Everything you're saying is so like, it's just running through my brain. I really love that because you are speaking to me about the power of language, the power of
Mhm.
how we speak and what we tell ourselves can impact how we engage with the world. You've spoken to me about the power of visualization, how it shows the power of your mind. And I love what you said. The brain doesn't know the difference. Once
Right.
we like harping on that, oh my goodness, we could change things. That's why people talk about the law of assumption. They talk about manifestation. They talk about how if we imagine something, I loved what you said about language. I get to go to work. I am already successful. It's language. It's so powerful and it works with our minds to rewire our brain. What does it do? It creates new neural pathways, right? Thank you. Exactly.
Yes.
What else did you say? Posture. Oh my goodness. Even a pose. I didn't know that even a pose could have an impact on how you see yourself and how you perceive the world. That is just so fascinating to me. Posture, yeah. Because when we see people slouching, we're like, what do we say? Chest out or sit up straight, stand up straight,
Hmm.
because slouching is seen as possibly being lazy or you've given up or so many things. The language screams from the body language, basically the words scream from the body. So I understand that now, what you mean by power posture, and I think I'm going to imbibe that in what I'm doing.
Yeah, and that's very true. I mean, that's why like I was hearing even body language experts who say like a lot of con artists will choose their victims or their marks by looking at body language, by looking at like people who slouch and people with poor posture, and that's why like it's scary, but that's why how uncanny it can be. But that's a lot of times because we're communicating a lot by what we're not saying by our words. Like our words are great for communication. We're also communicating a lot non-verbally to the world.
So true, so true. And, I always bring it back to I live in Lagos, Nigeria. And one of the things that you have to learn to be what they would say street smart. Yeah, exactly. I mean, come on, you said you worked in New York. It's similar, like Lagos and New York.
Very much so.
Exactly. So when you talk about con artists, how they look for their victim, I've learned how to spot the body language of a con artist. Maybe not necessarily body language, but mannerisms. You know what I'm saying? I'll give an example. Let's say, okay, I'm open, I'm friendly. What's the first thing that comes to the mind of a con artist? This person
Oh,
is accessible. I can come in so quickly. What's your thoughts before I
Yeah, no,
continue?
a lot of people misconstrue see friendly as being gullible, needy,
Thank you. Green.
and and therefore it's they think you're the perfect mark for that. And or like sometimes they may fear, so if you're very friendly that you're very needy, and so therefore they'll come up with that grandiose thing, I can help you, yeah, I have what you need,
Yes.
and therefore
Yes.
you need to mark. And I often will say, like, I can tell phoniness too, like,
Exactly.
especially if somebody's laying the kindness on too thick, in a sense. Are you really trying too
Okay.
hard to be kind to me right now?
Yes. Yeah.
Or you're trying to flatter me, because that's one of the ways that con artists will work.
Do
They'll use
yes.
flattery. They use flattery in a sense that they're trying to get you to buy their or get you to do whatever they want. Because you see a
Yes.
lot of
Hold
these
on. I'm
street
so sorry,
vendors.
Albert. I just want to finish my story so I don't lose my train of thought.
Sure.
Do you mind?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Go
Okay.
ahead.
So I was saying that the same way, so I'm open, I'm seen as gullible. There's always a satisfaction when I'm approached and with that kind of like con that they want to like approach me with. And all of a sudden, all that kindness, all that openness just closes and there's like a steel wall. And I'm like, wrong person. Please don't try that with me. And you said something, oh my gosh, there was something that you said that made me want to like hold on to those words. But like what I can say is that being in this environment, it sharpens up how you have to portray yourself. If you're able to portray yourself as that easy mark, but then switch that face, it changes the entire dynamic. And I must tell you, when I was approached by a certain person earlier this week, under the guise of, I've buttered her up. Yes, I remember what I wanted to say from what she said. That person was flattering me, but I'm no longer like susceptible to flattery. So I just take it. I say thank you. So said person must have thought that based on how I was smiling and engaging, that oh my god, I've buttered her up. It's time. Let's go in. So they came in, swooped in with the most demanding and just weird request, and all of a sudden I shut that down so quick, and the shock was so crazy. Like I saw that shock, that change in body language. They no longer came to me in a strong confidence, oh, this is going to work kind of like dynamic.
Yeah.
Immediately I shut it down. They just immediately cowered and they were like, and I was like, oh my gosh. And I wouldn't have clocked that if we didn't have this conversation. The body language just changed so
Yeah.
quick.
Well, because you call them out, in a sense, you
Yeah.
call them out on their game.
Yes.
And, that I sometimes have fun with these people in New York. Because one time I had, a street vendor was trying to sell me this perfume that was like bootleg, most likely bootleg, or like a watered down version of. And she kept coming up to me and telling me, "Oh, you're a good-looking guy. You're such this and you're such that. Buy my perfume." And I turned around to her and said, maybe if you offered me three more compliments, I might have considered it, false compliments. And I was like, so next time when you approach somebody, do that.
Yeah, do more, not
And
just one.
I walked away and I was like, that felt great,
It does feel great.
because it's like I could see right through that,
Yeah.
and now somebody with low self esteem might not be like, oh, somebody really likes me.
Mm,
Therefore they, and that's, because flattery is like one of the biggest things to do to get somebody to, to buy a product,
lower
to buy
their
a sale,
defenses.
because it disarms you. It's like it's taking
Yes.
away
Oh
the
my
the
goodness.
armor. And that's even if you look at cults, for instance. I mean, the first sign of a cult is love bombing you.
Yes.
It's the love bombing, like telling you how great you are, how wonderful you are. We love you. You're
Yeah,
here.
how special you are.
How
Yeah.
special. Nobody can see that, but I do. That's another
Mm,
thing too. If you ever get someone who starts to say how, I get you. You're so special. Now, other people may not see it that way, but you're special. I'd say run when you hear that, because that usually means something's coming,
I totally
nefarious in
get
a
you.
sense.
Yeah, yeah, I totally get you. I'll share one more story with you since
Sure.
we're talking about. Okay, so I just moved back to Lagos. This was March. I moved back to Lagos in February last year, and it was my birthday. So I was going to have like a solo lunch, all dressed up, went to a restaurant, and it was my first time driving in the city after so many years of being away in London. So I go there, I have my birthday, they sing for me, I'm in a cheerful mood. And I believe that based on two men were in the parking lot of that restaurant, and I believe they helped me park, or they said something to compliment me when I was walking out of my car to the restaurant. So I smiled, I said thank you because I'm engaging in that way. Fine. I went into my car, and through my mirror, my side mirror, I saw one of the guys looking at my car. And as I reversed to leave the restaurant, I noticed that the guy had situated himself by the door of the restaurant because that's how you pass to leave the compound. And immediately I passed him. He tried to stop me, and I sat down and I said, yes. He now said, Madam, since it's your birthday, do you mind giving us something small? And I said, it's my birthday. Aren't I supposed to be the one receiving something? And his face just changed because shock. I didn't expect her to speak back. I didn't expect her to call me out. And then he just smiled. Bye bye, madam.
Good, and it's fun, and that's one way to do that because you know that it's a disarming technique. Because also what a lot of people don't realize, even when the act of sometimes giving something to somebody increases the likelihood that you're going to be doing more stuff for them because they
Thank
can
you.
ask for more. It is a classic sales technique. That's why, like, very often unscrupulous salespeople get you to buy the first small product. Kind of interest you in like a $5 thing, and then all of a sudden you're spending $100
Yeah.
because now start adding on more elements to it because you already
Mm-hmm.
made that first obligation. So now, got you.
So crazy. Wow. I
It,
love
it,
swapping stories.
yeah, it's fun. I mean, this is fascinating.
Yeah, yes. Thank you so much for everything that you shared. I have one last question for you before we round up. In your own life right now, what sacred story are you writing that you used to be afraid of?
I I would say it's a series of stories. I think about being vulnerable, and I think expressing my true self. I always presented myself as a psychologist in a sense, as this person who's supposed to have all the answers and all that. And so now I've been like writing stories about just me being vulnerable and sharing my truth and being more real and being more raw. And I think that's so important.
That's so beautiful. And that's a beautiful way to end the episode.
Hmm.
Thank you so much, Albert, for joining me. And just before we go, after we close off this episode, I'd love to give you a tarot reading. Would you like one?
I would love that.
Lovely. So let's get into it. Thank you and bye, listeners.